All right, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this session on technology and media, the title, Traditional Media, Social Media, and the Polarization of the Electorate. This is the second of two town meetings organized as part of the Digital Citizenry Project. I am your co-host this evening with Moderator. We're both from Seton Hall University. But we're running a little bit behind, so I don't want to take any more time. I'm going to hand this over to our moderator, Stephen Schnall, who is a South Orange Village trustee and is going to take us through the rest of this program. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Mary, and thank you for everybody who's tuning in for this evening's conversation and discussion in the panel. It's Monday and just after the long holiday weekend, the Thanksgiving holiday weekend, which I'm sure was rather different for most of us. Non-traditional is my guess. But that being said, I know I still feel quite grateful and appreciative and thankful for all that we do have. And speaking of grateful, I want to thank Mary and Marta, Seton Hall University, the libraries in the villages of South Orange, Maplewood, East Orange, and Orange for their support and sponsorship of today's event. This is the second we've done now in about 5 weeks. Before the election, we had a meeting, a similar type of setup where we had 3 panelists speaking about technology and the implications of technology on our citizenship. And today we're going to focus more on media. So, and again, speaking of being grateful, I want to introduce, I'm very grateful for some terrific panelists. I'm going to introduce them now. First, we have Alex Torpey, who spent the last 10 years finding ways to improve the systems we use to govern through studying, exploring, teaching, and directly implementing predominantly in and around local government. From serving as mayor of his hometown of South Orange, an adjunct professor in Seton Hall's MPA program, a municipal business administrator, an entrepreneur and consultant, an emergency management director and volunteer EMT, and mentor and speaker, Alex brings together diverse experiences to help provide us a platform to rethink how we govern, manage, and think about the future of our communities, our republic, and ourselves. You can find more about his current podcast, which examines these issues at rethinkingwithalextorpey.com. That's a long URL. There's no punctuation or spaces, but it is rethinkingwithalextorpey.com. Next up, we have Professor Rob Pallitto. He's a professor in the Department of Political Science and Public Affairs at Seton Hall University. As a former public interest lawyer, he was lead or co-counsel in several precedent-setting cases involving housing rights and public entitlements. He has published 4 books, most recently, Bargaining with Machine, Technology, Surveillance, and the Social Contract, published by Kansas this year, 2020, as well as numerous articles for the scholarly and public popular presses. And third, Senator Vin Gopal is a lifelong resident of Monmouth County, born at Jersey Shore Medical Center in Neptune and raised in Freehold. He is proud to be a small business owner, having built his business from the ground up, now with 14 employees. Vin is also the founder and president of a 501c3 organization dedicated to helping Monmouth County charities and individuals in need. He holds a master's in public administration from Rutgers University. He previously served on the board of directors for the then Monmouth County Chamber of Commerce and also served as president of the Hazlitt Township Business Owners Association. He's also a past board of trustees member of Big Brothers Big Sister of Monmouth County. And Vin spent many years as a volunteer first responder, serving as an EMT, you got something in common with Alex there, and certified CPR instructor. Vin serves as Senate Majority Conference Leader and Chairman of the Military and Veterans Affairs Committee. He also serves as the Vice Chair of the Senate Higher Education Committee and as a member of the Health, Human Services, and Senior Citizens Committee. So again, a great reach out to a terrific panel. And with that introduction, I'm going to get us started. So again, it's about media. And kicking things off, if we look at media has been evolving in terms of how it's impacted our elections in the past. And specifically, if we look at the presidential elections, the history of the media involvement goes back, into the 1800s, with local newspapers, alerting residents that politicians were coming to town via train to meet them in their town squares. And then, we get fast forward into, 1930 or so, we have Franklin Delano Roosevelt, FDR, who was notorious for, giving conversations on the radio. And then if we go towards the 1960 election, we see the debate between Richard Nixon and John F. Kennedy, where it was clear the visual aspect of that debate clearly had a big impact on the election. And again, another 20 years forward, Ronald Reagan, he's broadcasting, pre-recorded videos everywhere. And more recently, again, another 20 or so more years forward, you have Barack Obama pioneering the use of social media. And what seems like a long time ago, but was really just a short little blip, we had Donald Trump as a reality TV host, which that increased his popularity to a great deal, helping him get elected. So turning it over to our panel, what do you predict will be the next significant development in the next year or two, or even going further out? Who'd like to get us started? Come on, jump on in. Somebody's good. There you go.
Oh, and the awkward pause.
Thank you.
No problem. It's great to be with everyone, and thank you to Seton Hall for hosting this, and to be with all of the South Orange folks, past, present. I see the mayor on, who I've gotten to know, has been doing a tremendous job, and former mayor, obviously. I guess I teach a class at Monmouth on state and local politics, and one of the things I try to teach them is all the different levels of government. And I have to figure out what the village board of trustees is versus the Faulkner Act and everything else. So I got educated on that. We've seen so many different aspects of the media changing over the years. One of the most frustrating things for me is I can't even watch CNN or Fox or MSNBC anymore, because a lot of the times it's just people giving their opinions. It's very frustrating. And we see that now on social media. We don't actually know what's news versus what is maybe, opinion. Twitter recently, maybe in the last 6 months, I think, put out a feature where they try to verify the source on the tweet. We see that now. We've seen a dramatic decline, obviously, in weekly newspapers. Or weekly newspapers are the ones that used to be at council meetings, are the ones that were doing the interviews. They've declined not just because of COVID, but prior to COVID. Things have been moved to the internet. You can reach people quicker on Facebook. Even in my own political campaigns now, we spend a lot more resources on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and Snapchat and all these forums, because you know who you're communicating with, you have the data, you have the individual's house value, what magazines they subscribe to, who they are, what they believe in, and you can communicate with that person really cheap. Which you can't do if you take out $1,000 ad in a newspaper, unfortunately, and you're trying to target, women ages 25 to 40 for whatever product. You don't know who in the household is picking up that advertisement. It might be somebody else you might not even get, and you lose that bang for the buck. So moving forward, I think we're going to continue to see digital advertising continue to dominate, unfortunately, because I love holding that newspaper. I love some of the weekly newspapers I grew up with, but I think you're going to continue to see digital marketing dominate. I think you're going to see hopefully more of a push on determining what is accurate, what is fact versus what is opinion. And I think, the things like the tap intos and the patches and all this have been really healthy. And I think those models hopefully will continue and figure out a way to make it financially solvent for some of these companies.
Thank you, Senator. Alex, I'm going to put you on the spot as someone who spends a lot of time looking forward in especially with regard to technology. Do you see anything, what do you see coming down the pike technology-wise for media?
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, and I would agree with what a lot of what Vince said. I think that I guess one of the bigger things that we might be seeing in the next few years is it seems like what we're doing and the business models that Vin mentioned, the advertising-driven business models of most of the internet platforms that we use don't create any business incentives to create a shared or collaborative narrative in what's happening in the world. It creates an incentive to create highly individualized, targeted realities. And that just started with wanting to serve more accurate ads to people so that they could see things based on their preference. I don't know if People remember when, Google first launched Gmail,
the name.
there was a little bit of flurry over, the privacy concerns of Google scanning people's email to be able to serve more targeted advertising. And a lot of people said, well, if I'm going to see advertising, I might as well see relevant advertising. And it didn't really seem that big of a step that we were taking. But I think looking back, what's become clear is that business model that is always trying to optimize and re-optimize to get people to stay engaged with a particular piece of content or platform, that whatever we want to see is whatever we will be served, because that's what captures our attention in these platforms. And so I think we have a really big sort of philosophical or conceptual choice to make, which is, do we want to continue to have the advertising-driven business model of many of these internet platforms basically decide how our politics works, how our civic infrastructure functions, how our government functions, how we educate ourselves and understand the world? Or do we want to do something a little more proactive or a little more intentional, instead of just relying on that business model, and try to create some way so that technology platforms can bring us together towards a shared understanding of what's happening, instead of rewarding us for having highly individualized understandings of what's happening? Steve, you might be on mute there.
Yeah, Steve, you're muted. Sorry.
Thanks. Thanks. Thank you, Alex, for that. And you mentioned advertising models and I'm sorry, business models and advertising. I want to go, there's famously John Wanamaker, a famous business maker and involved in the media business. He used to say that only about half of advertising dollars are successful. He just wished he knew which ones it were. And back in the day, you would put ads out everywhere, billboards and papers and everything. And you just didn't know, which was working when people showed up and bought your product or your service. These days with digital technologies, it's different. You actually can get that. So Professor Pallitto, perhaps, you could talk a little bit about how these newer digital technologies, which are allowing the ability for campaigns to actually target voters specifically on very minute issues, what you see the repercussions are, and or does it introduce any concerns to you? You're on mute, Rob.
Sorry, I should know better by now. Sorry about that. So thank you for inviting me onto this panel. I'm already, my brain is already buzzing with all the interesting things people have said. So I have looked at this problem because recently I've been studying the sort of the political effects of engagement with technology and some of the choices that we make. We're not fully aware of, exactly what's involved with the choices. And so the first thing that I would say is to pick up on something that Alex mentioned. These capabilities to be incredibly precise and accurate about finding the products that a consumer will want. They raise the same concerns in the voter context as they do in consumer contexts, and sometimes the line between voters and consumers can be blurred in different ways. So I don't know. This story may be old news to everybody, but a few years ago, a writer named Charles Duhigg noticed that Target had developed a very effective algorithm to predict which customers were pregnant based on the things that they were buying. This is not, this is old news by now, but I bring up this example because it was so accurate, it was so uncannily precise that sometimes people would be targeted for product solicitation when they didn't know yet that they were pregnant. So in other words, the algorithm knew more about the consumer than the consumer knew about herself. So there's one story where a father of a teenage girl came in and said to Target nearby and said, why is my daughter getting these ads? She couldn't be pregnant. And then a few days later, he found out that she was. So I have two concerns about that from a privacy point of view. The first one is a concern of sort of autonomy in choice, and that is, would we make the same choices if we knew that those choices were being presented to us by an entity that had vastly more information about us that we gave them? So one of the things is simply it makes you uncomfortable. The other is that you might react negatively to that relationship. And third, you might feel like you weren't freely choosing in those instances. And so all of those bring up a concern, I guess, sort of about a person as an autonomous subject. The other concern is something in the literature that's called choice architecture. This is a term that Cass Sunstein, the legal theorist, uses. And so he says that so many choices that we make as consumers have this architecture built into them. So if I think, what do I feel like drinking, right? I go to one of these Coke Freestyle machines, and my choice is I can have 95 different flavors of these sugared or diet drinks. So the architecture is already built in. So how many times are we just choosing sort of in a vacuum, if you want to put it that way, when we make consumer choice or a voting choice? And how many times is the architecture there that pushes us in one way or another? But then when government tries to nudge, Sunstein's book is called Why Nudge? So he's talking about how certain, like for example, the large soda ban in New York City was objectionable to a lot of people because they said, well, I want to be able to drink what I want to drink. So they notice the choice architecture in that instance, but they don't notice it in all of these other everyday contexts, including in voter choice of which candidate to vote for. I'm going to stop there because I think we'll probably say more about this, but those are my two sort of big concerns about the business model that has a capability to precisely target consumers and voters.
I love, Rob, how you sort of drew together the example of Target in a business consumer way, and then tied back to the politics. It's a different concern, and I'm wondering if Vin, maybe if you could take us. The question I'd like to pose when we get into social media and technology, specifically social media, but there are obviously a number of challenging side effects that occur. How do you see regulation? There is, we've been looking at the last election with Facebook and Twitter and various platforms trying to self-regulate. How do you see what they've done, how well they've done, and do you propose, what would you propose going forward?
I think the most important thing is, and I agree with a lot of what the professor said, and it's really crazy and sometimes scary what's out there in a good and bad way. But I think accurate information is important, and I think we need to make sure that our social media providers are, we're not saying moderating the content, because people should be able to give their opinions. They should be able to, but anyone that is out there as a news source needs to be a news source, and I think that needs to be regulated. It's concerning to me also if I see on Facebook and Twitter. Look, I'm not a partisan person, but the outgoing president did this a lot, where he would post stuff that was clearly just not true. That's concerning when you have, whether it's anybody, academics or university or politicians or anyone, putting out information that's inaccurate, and people start sharing it and retweeting it, and it's happened a number of times. This is a great debate. How do you regulate that in a way that protects people's right to free speech, and at the same time make sure that you have accurate information? It's a really hard place. I have to tell you, most of my constituent work, just taking away from the media for a second, most of my constituent work I have 18 towns, all different, but I've got about 40 town Facebook groups in between. So I'm usually on Ocean Cares or Tittenfall Social or Freehold News or one of these groups, because that's where I'm getting tagged. That's where constituents want to have an issue on unemployment or motor vehicle, whatever it may be. So it's an extraordinary resource on the side of being a state legislator and elected official, because you're able to engage in constituents where I can send a Facebook message immediately and we start connecting on the issue, where it's got real positives. I just wish there was a way, and I don't have a good answer, I don't know if anybody does, on how you moderate this moving forward. It's well documented what happened in the 2016 election with other countries getting involved. There needs to be strong regulation at the federal level on making sure we're protecting people's free speech, and at the same time making sure that it's clear, make it crystal clear that whatever someone is saying is their opinion. I think that is what would be the safest. So let people say whatever they want. They can say, you know, 1 million dead people voted, but it should say underneath that, this is this individual's opinion, or something to that effect, because that's always concerning. And regular residents doing it, but when you have an elected official or anybody, or professor, or any college president, whoever, and they have some responsibility, and they're putting that out there, people are going to believe that, and that's where the problem comes. And I do think there should be some disclaimer on that still allows them to say what they want to say, but to make it clear.
But then how do you draw the line, or distinction, I should say, between an individual? I can see you saying, all right, this is an individual's opinion, but the truth of the matter is any media property, whether it's, you know, CNN or New York Times or anything, it ends up being owned. You know, there is a publisher who has, you know, an opinion. So how might you, you know, draw the distinction between an individual and a company, which ends up being an individual?
It's a great question. I think it has to be clear, no matter who it is, what's an opinion versus what is fact. And fact is, for the most part, easily we're able to find that out. This was incredible. I forgot what I had an incident in my district last week. Governor Murphy was dining somewhere, and a resident came and lashed out at him, cursed out him and his family. And I'm on Twitter saying, you know, what I have disability, this and that. And I'm literally watching people who are tweeting information that's just incorrect about the governor's executive orders, which literally, if you just Google it, right? Governor Murphy, executive order, whatever, it says it right there. So like, it amazes me, so much of what we debate, it's clear what's fact and what's opinion. So I do think it shouldn't matter what the individual, what it is, but if you're going to go out there and you're going to tweet, or you're going to Facebook message, you're going to put whatever information you want out there, and it's not clear that it's not your opinion, I think that's a problem. And I think we could do it in a way that respects free speech.
Great, thank you. Alex, I want to turn to you because you're in a very unique position in that you are you were an elected official. You've campaigned. You've successfully won and served a term. You've also been a consultant to other elected officials who were running, and you've been a business administrator for municipalities. So you've kind of had all sides of that. And you know, how do you look at this, and what should be viable or available versus controlled and regulated?
I mean, we're wrestling with some really tough questions here that I think have sort of a, you know, like trying to think about like where to draw the line and how that works is so difficult, because I think we're at a place right now where in this country, we don't have agreement on who we should trust to do that. And I don't mean who specifically, what individual. I mean, from what area of our society do we expect that kind of accountability? I think people used to expect it. This is a little bit before my time, but in nightly news TV before internet days, I think there was some expectation to some degree that the news provided a sort of general clearinghouse for stuff that was true. It was, of course, controlled by a very small number of individuals, but that there was some accountability or some perceived accountability for that. That has sort of been democratized in a way where it seems like there is less trust in most of those news organizations who now are making their money in a different way, which is getting people to click on things on their website. And so there's not really an incentive for those organizations anymore to provide carefully nuanced, thoughtful commentary. You know, and it's part of the reason why, you know, you can start on YouTube watching a video about how to make a birdhouse, and in 3 episodes wind up in really bizarre and crazy conspiracy theory land, because the AI machine learning algorithms that power all these platforms don't care about the content at all. They only care about the content as far as it relates to getting us engaged more. And so I think one of the conversations that we're having here, but I think we have to have nationally, maybe on a community level, maybe on a state level, but the whole country has to have a conversation about who do we trust? Because we're in these positions where we're expecting companies like Twitter or Facebook or Apple, who have absolutely no incentive whatsoever to do anything promoting public good, unless it aligns with their business model. And as we just mentioned a little bit, and I think what we're starting to see is that, promoting truth for the benefit of the public and making money based off the product or service that you offer are not aligned in 2020. But on the flip side, people don't really trust the government to do it. And that's not a totally unfair thing, because most levels of government haven't really shown themselves to be that trustworthy. And so I think we're entering this really bizarre, where before we figure out where to draw the line and what's an opinion and what's fact, those are things we have to do. I think we have to identify what institutions in the United States do we collectively all trust, such that they can take that responsibility on, and we will all accept and believe the results of whatever they say. And I think there's a really interesting opportunity for civic associations and for libraries and for houses of worship on community levels to play sort of the role of, hey, we are an actual independent third party. We're not making more money or less money based on what we say here. We just want to help people have a good conversation, and that's the role in the process that we're playing. So I think we have to identify those kind of verification and trusting institutions.
Excellent. Yeah, thanks. Rob, I'm going to come back to you for a sec, because you introduced us to the power of commercial, of money has on these things. And Alex was then also just, talking about these large social media companies that where their incentive is clearly in the money-making side of it. So from a responsibility to the greater good, they're also, I want to talk about data, personal data. So part of their business models over the last bunch of years, before we even knew it, we were liking things and showing pictures and our affinities towards things. And they've just been thankfully just eating this all up. And somewhere out there, there's this tremendous database for each one of us that, tells us, like you said, whether we're pregnant or we like the color blue or whatever. How do you, from when we look at private data, there's probably a whole session in that, but just, if you could talk a little bit about, in particular with campaigns and politicians, either running for office or in office, the responsibility that they have once they accumulate that information.
So, it's not news to anybody that data is a commodity now that's incredibly valuable, comparable to oil at other times. So, especially when you can use customers that you're selling to, not only to buy from you, but also to generate more data that you can sell to somebody else. So, these processes are going on all around us. Is it realistic to expect that political actors are not going to be subject to the same kinds of the potential for abuse, as other people? On the one hand, it's reasonable to expect that, because we want virtuous public servants. On the other hand, I think we've seen again and again that technology often is neutral in its even in its design, but that it may help to fuel processes that are going on already. So, for example, if you think about the way that our college students use social media, use internet search engines, it's not really realistic to expect that suddenly they're going to become more diligent about separating scholarly and popular sources, more fastidious about using supporting evidence for their claims, that they're going to be, instead of looking about posts, kind of salacious posts about celebrities, that they're going to be looking to find comparable definitions of justice and Plato's Republic or something. So I guess the thing is that the tendencies, unfortunately, that are real to us, they're going to be there for political actors, including campaign managers, right, who are deciding how a campaign will go. Even though we always hope for virtuous public servants, and we have them. My fellow panelists are examples of that. But I guess there's a part of me that's pessimistic that if we have these these susceptibilities to our same habits of the way we think, and the way we argue, that they're going to sort of go away once we have more sophisticated or consumer friendly or user friendly technologies.
Okay, thanks, Vin. The next one's for you. It occurs to me again, as someone who has run successfully for office, you had a campaign manager and yourself to do things. And, there was a necessity to appear that you were in the lead. And when we get lawn signs, we want to own blocks and neighborhoods and regions. And I think there's an analogy in social media. We want to feel and look ubiquitous. But some of the ways to do that, again, is through money. You can essentially buy the election. So back to sort of policy and regulation, how do we control, where you have individuals, whether it was Donald Trump or Michael Bloomberg, where, people who can come and just spread money around and look like they're the de facto champ.
Yeah, unfortunately, as a result of Citizen United many years back, it's hard. You can have these super PACs or these independent expenditures come in and spend unlimited money. I think we need to do a better job, and to Facebook's credit, they have done a good job on making the process more rigorous as far as who's paying for the ads. It used to be easy years ago where you could buy Facebook ads and you can have anonymous people buying the ads, and it was a little bit, not even that long ago, probably 2015, 2016, around the last presidential election. And that's gotten a lot better. I think we need to continue to push for that transparency as far as who is paying for it. It needs to be clear who the advertisement is from, who is that political advertisement from. I think they've done a good job. They've got to continue to do a good job. But like anything else we battle with, and I have this battle down here all the time when you have one power company and you have a couple cable companies, and we have the same social media. You got a couple big giants out there, not a lot of competition. You got obviously companies that try to pop up, but these big companies that have millions of users, and I think there is a responsibility of government to regulate these industries and to make sure that that everything is happening fairly. So I don't know if you can stop the Bloombergs or any of these guys from putting on all this money in. Self-financing is always going to happen. We saw it. Our governor Phil Murphy self-finance. We saw Bob Hugin, the Republican, self-finance. We've seen John Corzine. So it's come up a number of times, and they have the ability to buy ads and buy traffic. I wish there was an easier answer. I think it's just really transparency on who's buying the ads and how they're placed. And we have to do a better job of making sure the social media companies continue to do that.
Great. Thank you, Senator. I'm going to transition slightly, but it's one of the key parts of the title of our session has to do with the polarization. And it's a natural thing if you continue where we were talking about social media. It's sort of the natural side effect about how the technology, you notice the things that bubble up higher and higher in your feeds. It's how momentum builds. The more people like things, the more it's going to keep showing up. So as that's building up, what you're also doing is it's reinforcing, a singular, vision and ideology. So that is the case. So Alex, if you could, give us your thoughts on, as we become more and more polarized and social media is feeding into that, what can we do to, I don't even know, should we resist it? And if we should, how might we try to at least allow for more civil discourse?
Well, I think that's a really important question. I think Rob sort of touched on it a little bit earlier, talking about choice architecture is, it's up to us collectively to design systems that we use, but we've sort of inherited the design of these systems. Like the soda machine is a good example. The million choices that you have, we have plenty of data that shows that above a couple choices, 3 or 4 or 5 choices, people's choices end up not being aligned with their own preferences anymore because there's too many choices and it's too complicated. And yet that's not how we design those things. We have this kind of idea built in somewhere subconsciously that that sort of more choice in every situation is the direction that we should be going in. That's freedom, is being able to choose whatever I want whenever I want it. But if that choice is a choice that you can empirically show is less aligned with your preferences, I don't know if that's really freedom. I would suggest that perhaps some structure, some framework that we choose ahead of time and say, okay, well, we're going to show you 3 options of what soda, and then we'll show you 3 more. That if we were to run studies and show that that actually produces better outcomes for us, I personally would be very interested in understanding how we can design things not for the not in some default way, but in a way that's actually intentional. And I think if we don't start doing that, the two kind of sides here. I'll give an example from one of my favorite science fiction books. I'm not going to say it because I won't say the name of it because I don't want to ruin anything on the plot here. But there was a point in the book. This is 1,000 years in the future where people are living around planet Earth. They're not on planet Earth at this moment, and they are fighting to take some of it back. And there's basically two different divisions that are living kind of in orbit around Earth, and they go and they're fighting this battle. And the commanding officer on the front lines of this battle is not a military general. It is a communications and media consultant. Because what happens on the battle doesn't matter, because what only matters is how people perceive what happens in the battle. That all of the living is happening somewhere else and the fighting is happening somewhere else. So the outcome of the fighting, who cares? But what looks like the outcome of the fighting and making sure that your side doesn't look like it's breaking any rules or anything like that, that was the important part. And so you had all these soldiers being commanded by a communications director. And I think that's a really interesting and kind of weird dystopian telling of the direction that we're going in, where we're starting to separate what is actually happening and an interest in understanding that just to what we think it looks like is happening. And so I think we're going in differing directions right now, and that's in part fueled by the business incentives of media that we've talked about, and in part it's fueled by having a political system that has two sides. And so you're basically of one side or the other side, and that doesn't give a lot of wiggle room to find truth. I mean, think about a courtroom. You don't expect either attorney to be trying to find the truth, right? They are trying to make their case, and you have a third-party observer, a judge or a jury, who has the power to get whatever information they want about what's happening and hold people accountable for what they say, and those people are the ones deciding. But we're living in that system. We just don't have a judge. We just have two sides arguing, and the independent third party, which is meant to be the voters, don't have access to the real information and can't demand it. So they're can easily sort of swayed by miscommunication from either side. So I think we have to, step back a little bit and try to think about, how do we want to design the system that produces these platforms? How do we want our society to function and talk about issues and make decisions?
Yeah, that was great. That is kind of scary. Rob, do you want to add to a little bit of that from what I was saying?
Yes. This is a question that kind of touches on a lot of things that I study and teach. So I wanted to come at it from one of the debates in American politics, which is whether or not the electorate is polarized. So 15 years ago, Morris Fiorina, a prominent American politics scholar, wrote this book. I don't get any money for advertising this book, but I'm just putting it up there for clarity's sake. So 15 years ago, he wrote this book, Culture War, ? And he asked whether there really was a culture war that led to polarization of the electorate. And he said no. He said, if you actually look at the data, the electorate is no more polarized than it was 50 years ago. So we academics don't like to give up on our theories. So last year, despite everything we've seen since 2005, Fiorina gave an interview, and he stuck with his thesis. He said, if you say that American political parties are polarized, you're right. If you say that the electorate is polarized, you're wrong. And so he goes back and draws on this survey data and how, number one, even in so-called red and blue states, most of the time there is a fairly close division between Democratic and Republican voters. He looks at particular issues, and he says that most Americans have moderate views on those issues and so forth. I'm not going to go into every sort of supporting argument that he makes, but that's a powerful view. He's a prominent scholar. I think what I took from this at the time, and what I think about now, is that when someone comes along with a bold theory, or argument about a theory, it's useful for the insights it gives, but it also allows us to pick at it a little bit. So I think that he's absolutely right in a couple of things that he says. One is, yes, parties, he uses the term sorting. So the Democrats and Republicans sort voters better now than they did 50 years ago. In other words, I will have a clearer choice in many cases based on what I think in terms of whom to vote for, especially since we have a two-party system. So he's right about that. I think he's also right that media, and we've touched on this already tonight, media has a job to do and a story to tell. So the story of culture wars sells very well. And so, those are valuable insights. But I think, again, I mean, it gives us an opportunity to really question and also offer contrary statistics. So a month before this presidential election, the Pew Research organization took a survey among likely Biden voters and likely Trump voters and asked them what they thought about the contrary result. So Trump voter, if Trump loses, do you think that the country will be headed in the wrong direction and there will be lasting damage? And so on both sides, identified Trump voters and Biden voters, it was like in the 90% range that they thought, yes, if my candidate loses, we're in serious trouble. Interestingly, there was also a question about whether whoever wins should reach out to voters who were either marginal or in the other camp. And there was an overwhelming yes about that. So these are complicated data, but I think one of the things that we can take from this survey is that whether it's the media driving a narrative that benefits the media, or whether it's the parties who are, or party activists, who are promoting, a polarized electorate. I mean, it doesn't really matter where you lay the blame, because it's a two-way relationship. So, media is affected by how people respond, and people are affected by what media outlets say. So the fact is, and it's sort of in an anecdotal way that we can all relate to, there's evidence of this polarization everywhere. I was driving on Route 18 yesterday, and there was a huge group of protesters protesting to overturn the results of the election. And people, in this town hall could have different views about whether it's right or not. My point is, it's kind of unusual, to see a vociferous demonstration like that over an election where the outcome really isn't in doubt. So I guess, I'm just throwing out all of the sort of components of this debate in political science about whether we're polarized, whether there's a culture war. And I bet you that if we went to every person who's on the screen, they would be able to give an example of sort of manifestations of culture war in a protest they've attended, in a class they've taught, talking to constituents. So, I mean, however we explain it, I think that phenomenon has an effect on our consciousness, how we experience politics in this country. So it's complicated, but I guess now I think it's a lot harder for Fiorina to make this contrary argument that there is no culture where there's no polarization of the electorate, only of the party. So sorry, I promise none of my other answers will be this long.
It was great. No, thank you. I'm just going to, there's a derivative question I'm going to ask Senator Gopal, and then we're going to see if we have any questions from the audience. But it's sort of an extension of the thing we were talking about, that you were referring to, Vin, earlier. And Alex, in his previous conversation, was talking, it's not the responsibility of the person who's posting, to be fair, it's up to the audience, and if it would be great if there's a judge, but there's not, right? We look at our feeds. So similarly, the issue with social media, it's not just the original post, but as we know, it's all the momentum, it's all the, oh, I agree, or they repost or retweet, and it just keeps building and building and building. So the concept of, and someone can say nasty, negative things, and there's an issue of, the right to be forgotten. If some information, true or not, gets out there, as we all know, it's very difficult to erase. So I'm not sure if there's any potential answer. I don't know if you've, dug into this as a concern, as an issue, but, I'd like to hear your thoughts on whether it be false information or real information, what do you do with it after the fact or during? Yeah. You're on mute, Vin, and it's hard to, if you could read that.
Sorry. Yeah, I just posted this real quick. You can see this. This is on Twitter. They have this disclaimer that comes up. This claim about election fraud is disputed. It was a tweet about election fraud. I think that's the direction we need to keep going in, and people should be able to give their opinions, but it needs to be clearly labeled that it's an opinion versus fact. And so I think we have to encourage and hope that Facebook and these other platforms do that. And it's really easy. There's no judge out there, but facts are facts. And I think that we owe it to these companies that are allowing users to spread information to make sure it's accurate. And if someone wants to give their opinion, that's give their opinion. If they want to come out and say, I think, I don't know, Chris Christie was the greatest governor in New Jersey. That's right. That's someone's opinion. But that's a lot different than saying, this is what the law is, when it's very clear that's not what the law is, right? Or this is what happened. And I think we need to figure out how to differentiate in those situations. And I think that it's really a fine line. It's obviously these are issues core to our Constitution and to the founding of this country. So how we do it in a way, you used to see, remember in the weekly newspapers, you had news articles and then you had editorials and you had letters to the editor, and now we don't have any of that. It's a free-for-all. We've even got some political, I don't even call them political, we got some news sites online that are starting to pop in that are clearly paid for and owned by political entities that are putting it in towns and putting it in areas to, not for the interest of being fair. They might put 2 or 3 articles on the weather or something, but there's a political agenda. That needs to have clear transparency and paid for lines, and that's something that should be regulated by government. So I do think that it's a hard issue, and it's an issue where you try to be as fair as possible. And I know that Professor Hale and his students at Seton Hall are going to figure this out for us, so we don't have to do it.
Thank you. Mary, if you could come off mute and let us know, do we have any questions from the audience that we'd like to hear from our panel?
Let me see. I don't see anything there right now, but please put something in if you've got one.
Okay. All right, I'm going to move on. Again, if we get questions,
Okay.
please post them. If you're in the audience and you want, feel free to post into the chat or directly to Mary, and she'll read it. I want to move to the next question I want to ask. I want to go global, right? Because it's not just America. These days we're all interconnected as it is, and social media stretches beyond borders. There is no borders, and it's so simple these days to create and to share videos, and you have your chat apps. It was amazing. Almost 10 years ago, social media really hit the front pages, at least for me, in terms of recognition, in terms of politics, with the Arab Spring of 2011, by taking pictures of the situation that was going on and the atrocities. It really woke people's eyes up. So I would like to ask each of you guys as our panelists, Alex, if you want to start off, how do you see the global stage changing in terms of social media?
Well, I think, we're seeing trends where the platforms that we use are sort of going in the direction of, more live, more dynamic content. But I think that's primarily, again, not to be a broken record, built on the business models of the companies that produce these platforms, which is, the more they make more money, the more time you spend in front of the app. In the last few years, I think we've started to see a very small shift in people realizing that this is harming us. This is harming our productivity. This is harming our mental health. This is harming our relationships. This is harming our ability to live in the present moment. And I think that as we see more people take that more seriously and more research being done, we're going to start to see maybe some technology solutions that are designed in a better way. I mean, for years, since Facebook has been around, they've sort of bragged about the fact that the platform will always be free. But that's not really something that anyone ever necessarily asked for. People pay for things. I mean, how many people pay for coffee every day when they could, make cheaper coffee at home? We all make decisions all the time about where to put our money. And I think a lot of people are happy to put their money. I mean, look at every time a new iPhone comes out, there's a line out the door. I mean, we're surrounded by times when people make decisions as a consumer to put it in a specific direction based on what their preferences are. And, if you were able to offer people a platform, maybe it cost $5 a month or $20 a month, or something like that. But the platform's algorithm wasn't designed to help you be a better consumer of advertising, but to actually allow you to create an environment. I mean, social networks are amazing tools. Like, we should be able to have these things without the whole bad side of it. There's no reason why we can't have a platform that doesn't, promote excessive vanity to get more likes. There could be platforms that promote people to tell truths about themselves in ways that we don't do currently. But I think we have to be the designers of that. And whether that's we going to start companies that produce these products, or we going into government to find the right ways to regulate them if we need to, or we to go into media to share the information about these things with people. There's so many different ways to plug in. And so I think there's going to be competing interests. There's going to be an interest that's going to be continuing to move along the highly targeted, highly incentivized towards as much engagement on the app as possible. And it's going to be a lot around live content, I think, and soon augmented reality with live content. But I think there's hopefully another budding movement that's saying, well, wait, I want to connect with my friends. I want to be in instant communication with people. I want to share things with people on other sides of the world, but I don't want to be selling that data to companies who are using it in a way that I have no control over. And so I'm hoping that side of things kind of grows a little bit. And I don't know which one of those is going to be more dominant going forward.
Gotcha. Rob, again, if you would consider internationally or globally, similar question, where do you see it going?
Mhm.
I was in a restaurant a while back when we could go to restaurants, and I overheard this group on the table next to me, and the guy was very loudly saying, we talk about democracy all around the world, and the fact is some people, some societies don't want democracy. And if I were a different kind of person, I would have turned around and said, you're right, we should just let the people decide. Oh, wait. But I mean, the point was that the reason why groups like the Electronic Frontier Foundation talk about the Section 230 that we've heard a lot about in the news as being such an essential protection for free speech is because you can't take a word like democracy and say only this administration can define it, or only the United States, going around the world and intervening militarily can define it. So democracy is something that's sort of an open, what it signifies changes over time. So, I mean, I think the EU has done a better job with, balancing the right to be forgotten and people's, ability to use social media freely. But, connected to that, I was just thinking about something that both my fellow panelists had said about drawing lines with facts. And so, I mean, nowadays, these questions about, well, we can't regulate because it leads to censorship, or, we have to hold the platform owners liable, or we can't hold them liable. I mean, one of the things we forget is all regulation is about drawing lines. So, I mean, right now, I think we would all accept a line that said, if I go on the news and say today is not Monday, it's Friday, people would be okay with saying, okay, that's a self-evident, indisputable, factual error. On the other hand, when we say this election was stolen, right, because there were millions of dead people who voted, that's also clearly a factual error, as I think Senator Gopal said before. So, I mean, I guess my point is that, line drawing is challenging in legal regulation, but we're always doing it. It's just a question, we do it in tort law, right? I mean, where do we allocate risk between the defendants of the world and the plaintiffs of the world? And I mean, similarly, with how you regulate. I mean, one of the things that the Trump administration has urged, because let's face it, both the incoming, the outgoing presidential administrations both have concerns about Section 230. So Section 230 is the part of the Decency and Communications Act that holds platform owners harmless. They're immune from suit for things that third parties post, right? So the way that the Trump administration has approached this regulatory question and say, well, let's take away the protections so that we can sue people whose content we don't like. So, I mean, to me, that's only one avenue for reforming Section 230. And it's one that doesn't really make sense because, litigation, even as a former lawyer, I can say this: litigation is not always the answer to everything. Especially if it's kind of unprincipled, norm-breaking litigation. So I guess, yeah, the point is we want to keep these fora open, and we can make divisions, like the senator said, between things that are completely factually unsupported, right, and things that we might have reasonable disagreements about. I mean, sometimes we know them when we see the difference.
Right. Steve, we do have a question. I
Yep.
stuck it in the chat to you.
Okay, there's actually, and I think this is a quick one. I think that
Okay.
Alex can answer pretty quick from Connor Campbell.
And there's another
Oh,
one
I'm sorry,
underneath
from
it. So.
I'm sorry, from John Sullivan. The quick one for you, Alex. He sent it to everyone. Someone running for local office on a shoestring budget. What platform would you recommend to utilize to get the most bang for your buck? Alex, this is kind of one of your things.
I think Steve, you already know the answer. I mean, what I would recommend, there are a lot of platforms out there. I think Nation Builder is one of the ones that's a good place to start. I did use that when I ran for office in 2011. It's a nonpartisan platform. So some of the platforms you can only get access to if the party's endorsing you, you're running on the line. Nation Builder is free to be purchased by anybody of any party affiliation. And I would just say to folks that are thinking about those sorts of things, is that the platform like that can be helpful in organizing your campaign, but don't allow the tool to sort of dictate where you're going. Put the right processes in place about how to run the campaign, and then find a tool that fits into that. But don't design your campaign around the tool. You'll be able to find something that will fit into what you want to do. And Nation Builder is one of a handful of platforms that might be worth checking out.
Thanks, Alex. We got a question from, and so this is open to either of the three panelists, whoever wants to take this. You can all see it. It's from John, and I'll read it out loud for those of you who don't see it in the chat. The question is, do you think that there can be an increase in tunnel vision with the diversification of social media platforms? There's been talk of an exodus to Parler away from Facebook by people who tend to align with the alt-right and similar types who feel they are being unfairly restricted online due to Facebook's programs flagging conspiracies and fake news. Would diversification present risks as concentrations of sanctioned hate speech, fake information, and the like? Anybody want to take that on? If not, I will move.
I'll break up the awkward silence again.
Thank you.
I looked a little bit on Parler, is what it's called, Parler, and obviously folks have been going on to there. I think the same rules need to apply no matter what the social media network is. Government leaders, academically, we all need to do a better job in regulating what's the difference between fact and opinion. And I think that can be done. I think it is good to diversify. It concerns me that people can't give their, don't want to label what should be an opinion, and that they feel that it's fact when there's just no evidence behind that they feel they need to leave to go to another network. That part's kind of a little concerning, but it's a free country. And I think that it makes it healthier. But I think all these social media outlets, and I'm sure there's going to be a ton of new Instagrams and Snapchats and all these things that come out, they all need to be regulated the same.
Okay, and we have a question from Connor Campbell. His question is, as for the disclaimers on social media, it has been my experience that it doesn't make people believe that the information is false and is more likely to make them think that Twitter is working on an agenda. How could this be mitigated, and would educational reform help the electorate make better decisions? And I'm going to take that actually and copy it to everyone so they can see that and read it. I know when I read it, it was pretty complicated. So I'm going to send that. It's going to be in your chat windows for the three panels who want to take a quick look at that again.
Yeah, I don't want to say, just real quickly, I don't want to say you're never going to convince everyone. If someone thinks that someone's working against them because they don't like the information they hear, look, we got to work on the 90%, hopefully, that are rational people.
Rob or Alex, anything you want to add to that? All right. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I guess I was just going to say that there's this old trade-off between autonomy and welfare. And if I tell you this is good for you, it will make your well-being improve, right? Then I'm infringing on your autonomy. If I tell you I'm going to let you do this thing that I know that's bad for you, it infringes on your welfare. And so, I mean, I think sometimes we're always caught between, we all do things that aren't the most productive or the best choice at certain times. I think that what we're seeing with some of these, these conspiratorial websites is sort of a symptom of where we are and how, we're not we in this group, but we as a nation, many people are sort of driven by affect and they're angry. So they want to go to a place that sort of confirms, whether it's a virtual place or it's a place in their head, a place that confirms, yeah, the world is against me. Yeah, these elites, however imagined, are against me. So I feel like it's a symptom, and I feel like it's a tricky thing to regulate, but it's a very concerning thing, because the mood is there are lots of people who are really angry, and they're angry about things that aren't real many times.
And
Thanks,
I
Rob.
think part of the tough part here is that when you look at like what some of the social media companies have been dragged into doing, right? Twitter or Facebook had no interest in doing any of this. And they've been ignoring, if they have a responsibility, they've been ignoring it since the platforms basically launched up until very recently. But they're facing pressure from a constituency. And if their audience constituency breaks into fragmented pieces, so let's just say conservatives leave a platform like Facebook or Twitter for Parler, and so those people are not consuming the advertising content and they're not engaging on the application, then the incentives change again, because now the audience, which at least to some degree had to be included in the thinking about how the app was going to work because they needed those people for their business. If those people aren't there anymore and they're not relying on that, and we have different platforms, this is the same thing that's been happening for years with some media outlets, is that they are just only going to tell people what those people want to hear. And so what you're going to find is that we have no one that we trust to moderate or flag anything. I mean, at some point, someone has to decide. There's somebody sitting in a room or a computer-generated algorithm written by humans that is saying fact or not fact, or disclaimer or no disclaimer. It's a binary choice at a certain point of either yes or no, and somebody's making that decision. And if we all are in different platforms, you're going to find conservative platforms are going to lean towards promoting conservative facts, and liberal platforms are going to promote liberal facts. And I think they're just going to do what we already know people do when they have a targeted audience, which is just try to engage with that audience specifically and not really worry about anybody else. So I think that people who are frustrated about the the disclaimers that some of the social media sites have been doing recently, I understand the frustration, because even though those things need to be said to some degree by somebody somewhere, on the other hand, I don't think that the people who are making the choices, which is the people who run those companies, are people. Nobody elected those people. Nobody chose any of those people. Those people are accountable to none of us at all. And they're making choices that literally create the reality that we see when we open up those computers or open up those phones.
Very good, thank you. Well, we're coming towards the end. It's been great having you guys. I want to give each one of the three panelists an opportunity to make some concluding statements. It's up to you, however you would like to, whatever you'd like to offer now. And I'm going to begin with the guy who's jumped in the first several times. I appreciate it. Senator Vin Gopal, you're up first to offer your concluding remarks.
Thank you, Stephen, and thank you, Seton Hall, and thank you, Professor Hale and Alex and Rob and everybody else who participated. Great to see everyone. Hope everyone's staying safe. This is going to be an important topic in the years ahead, and we see how much of an impact it has. I think we're entering into a scary place, and I deal with this with constituents all the time. And it's not unique to those on the right, it's those on the left too. And we end up with people who want to believe what they want to believe. And it's scary. And, you know, we're losing a sense of civility that we used to have as a country, and communications play such an important role in getting that basic civility where two people can disagree with each other, but disagree respectfully. And not even disagree over facts, disagree over opinions. So I think we've gotten to a dangerous place. There's a lot of faults to go all the way around, and I think we need to get to their better job. One of the people who asked that question was a great question. On, you know, it has that disclaimer on Twitter, but people think Twitter's out to get them, so now they want to go start to another form. I don't know how much education helps in that sense. I think it's got to be communication coming from the top down, leadership of all levels, to encourage what is healthy communication. Give your opinion, fight for your opinion, fight for your views, but do it with respect and do it with the truth. I think it's possible for folks to get there. And so I look forward to the continuing conversations on this topic. And I know the months and years ahead are going to be some really complicated, difficult conversations regarding not just government involvement, but what does communication look overall? What does the press look overall? What does the media look like overall? We know a lot. We all know journalists now that they work and they end up in the public sector or the private sector. They go somewhere because it's not the living that they used to make 10, 15, 20 years ago. These are all changing scopes of journalism and communication as a whole that we'll have to deal with. And it's great to be with everyone tonight. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for your remarks, Senator. Rob, you want to go next? Your concluding remarks?
Sure. So I wanted to thank my fellow panelists. It gives me a lot to think about, and I've learned a lot. I want to thank you, Steve, and Mary and Marta for organizing this event. I mean, I think the place I would pick up is where Senator Gopal said we're coming to these challenging times, and I think that the really daunting challenge to me for elected officials is to reach out and represent everybody, as the president-elect has said he would do, but also not to compromise on constitutional values, human values, decency, respect, things that, the idea of human equality and dignity. And so to be able to reach out and engage in dialogue, but also hold firm to these principles, it just makes me relieved that I am a professor and not an elected official, because it's going to be a tough thing to do. So I give you all the credit in the world.
That's great. Thank you, Rob, very much. All right, and last of our panelists, Alex, you want to give your concluding remarks?
Sure, and thank you, Steve, and everybody else at Seton Hall for hosting this. Hopefully, I'm sure we'll need to have some of these conversations going forward. So hopefully we can do more of that. I guess my kind of final thoughts would be, I think we're at, I think people always feel like we're at sort of unprecedented times. At every moment in history, things kind of feel like we're falling off the edge of a cliff. But I think that it's possible that in the way that we use technology, that we are at a really important decision point, and maybe even a fork in the road. I mean, I'll throw it out with an example that might help here. So I think, we inherited these technology platforms. Rob before said, and I agree, I think they're neutral, and it's kind of how we use them and how they integrate into whatever other dynamics might have been ongoing before the platforms were created. But we sort of create these platforms ignorant of those things. We just make them and then we just start using them. We don't really talk about them that much, and there's not a lot of space for how and why we design things in certain ways. And so the example is, everybody here has probably sent mail through the post office before, right? The United States Postal Service. We're probably all aware, certainly those of us who've run for office are aware, that tampering with a mailbox or mail is a pretty serious federal crime, right? That's up to 5 years in federal prison and a $250,000 fine for opening somebody else's mail. Yet we live in a world where we freely give all of that information away that previously was protected by those mail tampering laws. We're giving 1,000 times more detailed information than whatever could have ever been in an envelope in the Postal Service to Amazon and to Google and to Facebook all day, every day from all of our devices. And we just sort of accepted that. And I guess what I would kind of throw out to everybody is, let's try to take some steps back. What are some of the assumptions that we've made about how things work the way they do? And this is one of the ones that I think is critically important to moving forward, which is that we should have a right to communicate over the internet in a way that is secure and that protects our privacy and autonomy and our data as something that we own. And it's not sort of a natural resource that can be mined by anybody who wants to make money off of it. And so I would use that as an example of an assumption we made with the mail, that communication needs to be private and we're going to have serious penalties in place for people who violate that privacy, to basically everything we do on the internet, which is totally open and able to be mined for other people to make money off of. Let's question some of those decisions we made and design some platforms that actually serve our interests.
Thank you, Alex. I want to wrap up now and again, thank everybody for participating. We heard some great insights coming from different perspectives. I really like that our panelists, came from, we had a professor, an academic, we had an elected official, we had somebody who's served in government, both in a staff and an elected role, and actually acts as a consultant. So it was really great hearing different points of view on some really challenging topics that don't, quite frankly, have answers yet. It's going to be interesting, as our panelists have talked about, to see what comes down the pike. I was trying to do a little, visioning and see what, if anybody could kind of predict the future in crystal ball, but we all know that's not possible. We can certainly influence it. And with that regard, I do want to really thank the people who do influence that are the folks who are educating, the people who arranged this whole project, the Digital Citizenry Project, Mary and Marta, with the assistance of several people. But you guys, by doing this for our community and all our stakeholders, it's super important. And we thank you for arranging these sessions like this. And hopefully the audience is appreciative and has learned a few things. I know I have. So thank you, guys.
Well, thank you all too again. And thank you, Steve, because he's right. Those other people would have been Steve and Matt and Rob, who helped us organize this and helped us figure out how to advertise and get the word out there. We've been working with the local librarians very closely on this project. There will be some events in the spring. There is supposed to be a 4 towns, 1 book event. So people from Orange, West Orange, Orange, East Orange, South Orange, and Maplewood, those are the 4 towns, doing the same book, doing a symposium in the spring. So hopefully please stay alert, and we'll be posting information out there about those. Thank you again so much to Senator Gopal, to Alex Torpey, to Rob for participating tonight. Thanks so much for all of you who came. We really appreciate it. Thank you. And this will be recorded and it'll be posted on at the Seton Hall website. You can find our Digital Citizenry homepage. It's open access, so you'll find this recording there, and we'll send out a link to it to those of you who are on the panel tonight.
All right, everyone, stay safe.
Yes,
be
thank
well,
you very
be healthy
much.
and safe.
Thank you so
and
much.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays. Yes. Take care. Good evening. Thank you.
All right. So long, everybody.
Thank you, Steve.
All right. Bye. Mary, you want to hit the...
Okay. Stop the video. All right. Lovely. Thanks so much. Well, couldn't have done it without you.
No,
You
it's
were
terrific.
wonderful.
I think it's still showing recording. Just
It did say it's got it running. I've got an X
okay.
through it. Let me